Hi, welcome back to Do Fix Differently. In this episode, I want to talk about migration projects. It's one of the areas that we highlighted right up front of the series about the areas that people find quite difficult in terms of fix. Migrating from one fix engine to another is a large project. It's always a large project that feels a little bit all hands on deck, and it takes up multiple months. When firms are moving between lots of different types of fix infrastructure, either swapping out a fix engine or perhaps changing their middleware behind the fix engine, something like that, it always becomes quite difficult. So in this episode, what I want to do is I want to think about what are the various different components that go into a large-scale migration project, and think through the various areas of pain within them, and also think about how you might address those things differently if you're going about it in the future to reduce pain through the project. So let's start off with all the major components. Every project is different. Of course it's different, so I'm just going to highlight some of the key areas here. The first one is the API itself, the one that you're about to move to, needs to probably be very similar to the one that you already had. Now that means picking up the API vocabulary, the dictionary, the workflow, the way that it behaves, and moving that over to a new fix engine or fix infrastructure, depending on what you're doing. Now, this is a job that's largely done by your development team and checked by your QA team. But there are things that we can do in terms of an artifact perspective that can facilitate that. So lots of fix engines, for example, use a quick fix style XML dictionary to describe how the API behaves and use that for various different validation logic. If you're picking up an XML dictionary from one fix engine and dropping it directly into another fix engine, you can see that that's going to be far more efficient than having to recode some custom configuration somewhere. So that's the first piece, is getting the API to look and behave the same between the two different infrastructures. The second one is actually transformations. Now, in other episodes, I've talked a little bit about the need for banks and exchanges to accommodate customer requirements in terms of bespoke fields or changes to their API. And those things are normally captured in transformation files. Now, they could be hard-coded code, essentially, or they could be XML files that are scattered around the various different infrastructure. One of the biggest problems people always face in a migration project is picking those transformations up, recoding them into whatever the new infrastructure requires to facilitate the same thing, and then recertifying that whole thing. It's a big regression cycle that they go through, and in order to be able to do that, that's the largest problem. So making your API behave the same way, picking up and dropping down your transformations into the new environment, those are the first two. Third, you need to think about network. So how are you going to cut across between the old infrastructure and the new infrastructure? Are you going to ask customers to perhaps repoint to a different IP or port somehow? And if so, you need to accommodate in your project plan the fact that that's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for them to open up their firewalls. You also need your own IT networking team to be on board with this, so they understand the series of projects that need to happen with customers. And finally, the big element that the business guys will always look for is tracking and reporting. They're going to want updates on how far through this project actually are we, what are the sticking points, who's coming next, and so on and so forth. So tracking and reporting is always going to be a large element to any large-scale migration project. So this series is all about doing fix differently. So if we know how we do today, essentially all hands on deck, people just go around building tracking spreadsheets and so on and so forth. How might you do that differently in the future to reduce future pain? Okay. So in terms of the first two, API vocabulary and dictionary and the transformations, the key thing that I want to impress here is the idea that the reason why you experience that pain today is because everything that you normally have is tied to the vendor implementation that you're moving from. And normally you then think about just migrating that to something that is appropriate for the vendor that you're moving to. That does nothing to help you should you subsequently move to another vendor 3 later on, right? Because you're going to go through the same cycle again and again and again. There are mechanisms by which you can abstract all of these vendor-specific configuration files away and have them into a single golden source of truth that allows you then to transform it out to various different places. So you're not constantly re-engineering these configurations. So check out our videos on Fix Orchestra and FinSpec as two leading formats to allow you to capture all of this document, all of these specificities, the dictionary, the transformations, into a consistent language that then can be retransformed out again later. The other thing that you can do from a vocabulary and a transform perspective is actually take the time in advance of the project to build up the set of assets that you have. If you've got transformation files scattered all around your organization, for example, you want to accumulate those all into a single place, understand exactly what they are, try to trim out any dead wood, if you like, in those transformations, things that just aren't being used. The more you can do that ahead of time, the more you can clean up your data, the lower the problems you're going to face later on. So if you ever feel that you have a downtime in your fixed onboarding cycle or your development or QA cycle, those are really good projects to pick up. Try to get yourself ready so that the next time that you have to do a migration project, things are much easier. Think about year-end freezes, for example. People tend to stop doing development items around the year-end. That's a great time to pick up this sort of project. The third item that I talked about was network changes. So how would we do that differently? There's lots of things that you could do from a networking perspective, but it's a little bit outside of the scope of this series. So I'm actually going to skip over that one and just go straight to the last one, which is all about tracking and reporting. Now, typically what we find in migration projects is people just go for the standard things off the shelf. They all try to have an Excel spreadsheet that is great for the purposes of the project, but everybody kind of forgets to update as the project goes on. Or they try to track it through things like Jira as well. Now, you could use those types of tools. They will work. They're not exactly the most efficient tools, but they will actually work and get you through where you need to be. A smarter and a better way of doing it, though, if you were to do Fix differently, is to think about looking for tools which allow you to automate parts of that migration, right? So that means, how do you create a template project upgrade for a particular customer, for example? Walk them through all of the steps around, you need to change this network from this IP to this IP. That's a template email that should be sent out to a customer automatically. Don't have humans involved. The whole process becomes much faster. They can also help you to run more customer migrations in parallel. And that's really the key to getting your overall end-to-end project time down as a whole. So check out workflow automation tools. We have one called Flow. That's a shameless plug. But there are other tools out there which will help you actually automate elements of the workflow management around migration things. So the key to helping you get your next migration project in shape, number one, do your homework ahead of time. Collect together all of the assets and the artifacts that you need around transformations in your document and your dictionary. Put it into a consistent, non-vendor specific format. And number two, invest in tools that help you actually automate the process of migration, not do things manually. Hope this helps. If you have had great success in a migration project and want to share it, please do reach out and get in touch. If there's anything else that we can help you with in terms of migration, or any comments or suggestions that you have on what we've talked about here, please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, please subscribe and keep up to date with how to do Fix differently.